I call the member for Coogee.
Good member too.
Good member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak in reply to Her Excellency's address at the opening of the 55th Parliament of New South Wales. Firstly, I'd like to commend Her Excellency on the outstanding manner in which she discharges her duty to this state and place on record the pride that I feel in the long association that she and her husband, Sir Nicholas Shahady, have had with my electorate of Coogee. When in opposition, Mr. Speaker, the current government gave the people of New South Wales its commitment to take prompt and effective action to lift this state from the putrid mire of 16 years of Labor maladministration. We campaigned, Mr. Speaker, with the guarantee that, if elected, we'd throw off the shackles and constraints that have ossified this state, this great state, that have hampered the ambitions of its people for far too long. So it is with great satisfaction that I stand here today, a member of this great government who offered the people of New South Wales a real alternative, an opportunity for real change, a member of a government which has wasted not a minute to deliver on the commitments that we made. The Governor's address outlines this government's strong vision to get New South Wales back on track. And let's make no mistake, this government will make New South Wales #1 again. That may have been a campaign slogan, Mr. Speaker, but it was my commitment to the people of Coogee. My electorate of Coogee has been quick to benefit from the energy of this new government. Tell us about it. Coogee, I will indeed. Coogee is the smallest electorate in New South Wales, but we have some very Coogee just to the east here, wonderful, great, with the most beautiful beaches, the finest shopping, and even the most beautiful people in New South Wales. Indeed, the great restaurants. Coogee's the smallest electorate in New South Wales, Mr. Speaker, but we have some very, very big issues that need the attention of this government, the urgent attention of this government, after 16 years of ignorance on the issues that really matter to the people of New South Wales. First and foremost, there's simply no excuse for the lacklustre state of our public transport network, Mr. Speaker. Sure, it moves a lot of people every day and it gets you there eventually, but the experience is by no means pleasant, efficient, or even remotely enjoyable. And during the 16 years that the Labor Party held government, it got worse and worse, never better. I remember as a child that the government, I can remember that far back, that the government introduced brand new Mercedes buses. The sparkling new buses arrived, and the joke soon became that we had chauffeur-driven Mercedes. But these Mercs still rattle up to the bus stops each day, and now the joke is, Mr. Speaker, that they're still in service. For 16 years, our buses have been badly coordinated, our public transport has been badly coordinated, and nowhere near as clean or efficient as it could be. Our buses are unreliable, they're often late, too early, or sometimes they don't turn up. And when they do turn up, you've got a better chance of getting a seat in a mosh pit. Who'd have thought that it'd be so hard to get on a bus this day and age? The conga line of buses that roll up Anzac Parade every morning and every evening is most definitely the wrong solution to the transport needs of my electorate of Coogee. This is why we need light rail to the seat of Coogee, right through the eastern suburbs, which would pass hundreds of thousands of people. It'd pass the entertainment precincts of the Sydney Cricket Ground, the Sydney Football Stadium, Fox Studios and the Hordern Pavilion, and it would come to the University of New South Wales, the Prince of Wales Hospital, and through the shopping precinct of Kensington. It would provide a cleaner, greener, cheaper and faster public transport option for residents who have been crying out for it for so long. Modern light rail systems operate in hundreds of cities worldwide, and it's time Sydney genuinely got on board. As part of the Eastern Suburbs Transport Task Force during the election campaign, I heard firsthand from so many people about the dire state of our transport system, and through my time in this parliament, I'll remain a firm advocate of light rail, and I'll fight to bring it to the eastern suburbs. Mr. Speaker, there was one part of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act that is well known to the residents of Coogee. All members of this chamber know exactly what I'm talking about. That's the infamous Part 3A legislation, the legislation which aroused the stench of corruption in planning in this state. Part 3A raised the ire of Coogee locals with regards to the application to redevelop the Coogee Bay Hotel. In fact, it irked them so much that they managed to table the largest petition presented to this Parliament in the last term, just before the last election. I'm proud to say that since day one, I've opposed the overdevelopment of the Coogee Bay Hotel. This proposed development would have ruined the unique village atmosphere of Coogee and left us with an eyesore perched on one of Coogee's most prominent intersections for all to see. In fact, well, if it had gone ahead, Mr. Speaker, it would have been an appropriate monument to the disastrous planning policies of those in the opposition benches. Labor deliberately left the community out of consultation on this project, preferring to take the project secretly in under Part 3A, something it did less than 3 months before the election. I was disgusted to learn that Labor had gone to great lengths to keep this a secret from the Coogee community, a community who turned out in their thousands against this development. This breach of trust should never be repeated, but most importantly, it should never be forgotten. I note Her Excellency's sentiments with regards to the high standards of our universities and researchers and the potential to help build our state's economic capital and to drive economic growth. The University of New South Wales, in the western part of my electorate, is recognised as one of Australia's best teaching and research universities. It's a university that excels in the fields of science and innovation, a university that develops ideas and promotes lasting knowledge by creating an academic environment where scholars and students aspire to excel. This government will tap into the resource provided by our leading universities by investing in more high-level research programs. The O'Farrell-Stoner government is committed to open and transparent governance, and as the member of Coogee, I will be open, I'll be transparent, and most importantly, I'll be accountable. Our community should expect nothing else, despite the efforts of the Labor Party to undermine our community's trust over the 16 years. Mr. Speaker, we've repealed Part 3A of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act and returned planning powers to local communities where they belong. Communities must be able to have a say in the planning process, and there's no better way to do this than through local government representation. We've returned residential, retail, commercial developments, coastal subdivisions and marinas to local councils, ensuring that not only projects of genuine state significance, ensuring that only projects of genuine state significance are seen by the state government. Speaking of the Coogee Bay Hotel, Mr. Speaker, we should turn our attention to antisocial behaviour and the real problems experienced by Coogee residents. There was a time when most of us will remember when people could go out for a drink with their friends, stay up late, listening to a pub band, do you remember that? Then go back home without feeling the urge to snap the aerial off somebody's car or the windscreen wipers, to kick over their wheelie bin, to smash beer bottles into the ground or vomit into somebody's postbox. Drunken antisocial behaviour and low-level crime makes life unnecessarily stressful and unpleasant, not only for my constituents of Coogee, but for people all over New South Wales. It's all well and good to clamp down on offenders, but you also need to balance residents' rights to safe streets without going over the top with a nanny state approach that would kill off a good night out for all altogether. I therefore welcome the government's moves to strengthen police powers by increasing police presence in the most troublesome hotspots and giving police move-on powers to move on drunken individuals who may cause harm to themselves or others. Previously, police could only move groups of 3 or more people, making our police potentially punching bags for lone drunks who decided on any particular night that they'd like to wreak havoc. With the new powers granted to police, that lone person causing a ruckus outside an apartment block or in the main street will be moved on so that the local residents can get the peace and quiet that they deserve. Police move-on powers are not only part of this government's action to eradicate antisocial behaviour of those who act in a disorderly manner, but those who flout the law and facilitate this kind of behaviour that should not be tolerated. There is no more effective way to control the management of a venue than the real possibility of it losing its licence. That's why we'll be introducing 3 strikes and you're out policy to licensees who think that there's no problem with serving patrons alcohol until they've become a nuisance and potentially fall over. Of course, the issues I've mentioned are just a few of the issues of my residents, and the great actions of this initiated by this government are just a few of what need to be done. Let's take a look at some of the bills that have already received assent from Her Excellency the Governor, emphasising how much needed to be done in this state and how much we are doing to get New South Wales back on its feet. First of all, we've given democracy back to the Illawarra through elections in Wollongong and Shell Harbour councils. We've reformed the capacity for imposition of criminal liability on directors and executive officers for corporate misconduct to accord with the agreement under the Council of Australian Governments. We've ensured that Labor Party's early shutdown of Parliament, that disgraceful proroguing of Parliament, will never ever be repeated. We've provided for responsibility and accountability in our health system by returning decision-making closer to our patients by cutting red tape and creating local health districts and their associated boards. We've banned success fees for government lobbyists. We've extended the empty nester transfer duty to concessions to over 55s. We've removed Torrens Title Assurance Levy tax, the insurance levy, a tax by stealth on New South Wales home buyers. We've improved the efficiency of our courts through various measures. We've enabled 2 or more local councils to enter into arrangements for the provision of library services. We've reformed occupational health and safety laws. We've given police greater move-on powers. We've enforced the previous government's policy on public sector wages to ensure fiscal responsibility. We've given the court security officers better opportunity to facilitate the smooth running of our courts. We've given courts the power to disqualify a graffiti vandal's driver's licence. We've retained the maximum annual percentage rate for short-term credit contracts. We've continued the GM Crop Moratorium Act for a further decade. We've just strengthened the provisions for protections available to journalists and their sources in New South Wales. We've helped small business to create more jobs through a payroll tax rebate. We've given those who murder police officers mandatory life sentences. We've created Destination New South Wales, an amalgamated body to bring the best events back to Sydney. We've repealed the terrible Part 3A. We've established Infrastructure New South Wales. We're giving powers back to local councils to control their own elections and electoral administration, and we've established regional relocation grants for New South Wales home buyers. And we've achieved most of this in the first 100 days of this parliamentary term. In closing, Mr Speaker, I want to thank Her Excellency the Governor for her address to Parliament, and I commend the strong vision that she espoused, and I will commit myself to realising that vision for a strong and prosperous New South Wales well into the future.
Well, the question is that the address by Her Excellency Professor Marie Bashir be adopted. I call the member for